Hello and welcome to this special broadcast on WION. My name is Mohammed Saleh. Now, the Iran-US negotiations for a potential nuclear deal have reached a crucial red line. Now, Donald Trump's special representative for the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, has said that Iran needs to completely give up its nuclear program. But for the Iranians, this is effectively a deal breaker. So the question is this: is there a way out of this impasse? Now, why is the nuclear program so important for the Iranians, and why has the Trump administration now again taken a hard line where it does not want to accept even a civil nuclear program for the Iranians? And more importantly, what role is the state of Israel playing in these negotiations from behind the scenes? There are reports that state that Israel may try stage a unilateral attack on Iran's nuclear facilities, even without the Americans initially being on board this plan. Now, to discuss the nitty-gritties of these issues, we are joined in this broadcast by Professor Fouad Zadi, who's an associate professor and faculty of world studies at the University of Tehran. He's joining us live in this broadcast. Now, Professor, this is a crucial moment in these negotiations because the Americans over the course of the last week have hardened their position, where Steve Witkoff, Donald Trump's Middle East envoy, now says that it is not acceptable for the Iranians to have even a civil nuclear program. How does Tehran respond to this hard line taken by the Americans?
You know, this was an issue 10 years ago, 2015, and at the original nuclear agreement. Americans initially said the same thing, that they're not going to allow Iran to have a civilian nuclear program enriching inside the country. And then after they realized that that is not going to happen, that Iran's red line is actually a serious red line, then they changed their mind. And so in the 2015 agreement, Iran managed to continue enriching 3.67, and there was no problem with that. Iran did not build a nuclear weapon with that level of enrichment because it is not possible physically to build a nuclear weapon with 3.67 enrichment. In order to build a nuclear weapon, you need to enrich over 90%. And Iran has never done that. And under that original agreement, there were very extensive inspections of Iran's nuclear sites. So if Iran decided to one day enrich more than that minimum level, everybody would know, and then the consequences would be good for Iran. So if what Trump says should be taken in its face value, Trump says that he doesn't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Reaching an agreement should not be difficult because you can enrich and not have a nuclear weapon. In fact, you have Germany,
I think, Professor, if I can just interject you there, that's your opinion where you say reaching an agreement should not be difficult. But the fact is, according to reports, the Iranians are reported to have enriched uranium to as much as about 60% purity. And a lot of experts are saying that, you know, if they can do it till 60%, then it would not be hard for them to reach 90% purity. The question that I'm asking you is this: why is even a civil nuclear program so important for the Iranians that they are willing, that they're possibly, you know, inviting a sort of a war that the Americans, or at least the Israelis, want to wage on Iran to try and destroy Iran's nuclear assets?
It is true that after the United States left the agreement in 2018, the U.S. was in the agreement for 3 years, and Trump became president last time, he left the agreement. And what happened at that time was that Iran decided to enrich more to show the fact that Iran is able to enrichment at 60%. And Iran can go back to 3.67%. And the reason this is important to Iran is that Iran does not want to be singled out. You know, Iran has a very old civilization. Iran is a proud country. Iran needs enrichment inside the country because we have had experiences of trying to buy enriched uranium from outside, and because of U.S. pressure, no country would sell enriched uranium to us. As I was saying,
Right.
we have many countries in the world that are enriching at civilian levels, and they don't have a nuclear weapon, like Germany, like Holland, like Brazil, like Argentina, like Japan,
Right.
like South Korea, and others. And Iran wants to be a normal country like other countries. And Iran is a member of NPT. If you
Right.
are a member of NPT under Article 4, you can enrich. So giving Iran's nuclear policy to some American politician is not going to be acceptable either.
Now, when the negotiations started, the American line was slightly different. Why do you think the Americans have now changed their stance, where earlier the line that was taken by Donald Trump was that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon, except for that, Iran can do what it wants? But why do you think the Americans are now saying, especially Steve Witkoff, that even a civil nuclear program by Iran is no longer acceptable for the Americans?
This is due to Israeli pressure. In fact, today they are starting a new round of talks in Rome. You have the Iranian team on one side, and then you have Steve Witkoff, plus two Israeli officials on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
So the Israelis are not shy about showing that they're influencing U.S. policy, and they have been saying for the last 20 years that Iran is 6 months away from a nuclear weapon. So whenever they say that, people generally laugh, because if Iran wanted to make a nuclear weapon 20 years ago, Iran actually could. This is not Iran's policy to do that. And in order to make sure that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon, the Trump administration could either go back to the old agreement, or they can have a new agreement making sure that Iran's enrichment is at low levels. The only way you can make sure of that is to have an agreement with Iran.
Right.
But if they want to have maximalist goals, it's not going to work.
Right. Now, at the time when these negotiations are taking place between Iran and the United States, the fact is there are reports which state that Israel under Netanyahu is coming up with plans to carry out a unilateral attack on Iran's nuclear sites. How does Iran view these reports that the Israelis are plotting for unilateral attacks on the Iranian nuclear sites? Because once they start these attacks, then the Americans will also jump on the bandwagon.
Well, Israel is a genocidal regime. They're killing an average of 20 children on a daily basis in Palestine for the last 19 months. They are capable of engaging in genocide against other nations, other countries. So Iranian leaders take those threats seriously. Iran's foreign minister wrote a letter to the UN Security Council yesterday, highlighting the fact that threatening Iran in that manner is against international law.
Right.
And Israelis cannot actually have any successful attack on Iran's nuclear sites without the U.S. help. So in that letter, Iran foreign minister says that they would hold Americans responsible if Israelis attack Iran.
Oh.
You know, Americans have about 50,000 troops in this part of the world. There are 10 places that Americans are concentrated in, their military bases. And they will be vulnerable to Iranian response if they attack Iran.
All right. Now, my final question to you, Professor, is this. You know, the fact that there was already an Iranian nuclear deal, it was called the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. It was struck between Iran and 6 world powers led by the United States of America. But in 2018, it was Donald Trump who unilaterally chose to walk away from that agreement, describing it to be the worst negotiated agreement ever in American history. And now there's a lot of confusion as to how different this nuclear deal would be if it is successfully negotiated by the Americans. Why do you think Iranians can trust Donald Trump this time around, and why do you think that the Iranians can be confident enough that another subsequent American president would not unilaterally again walk away from an agreement that could be struck now?
You know, there's this American saying that if you fool me once, shame on you. If you fool me twice, shame on me. But this time around, with the same guy, Iranians are going to be much more cautious about dealing with the United States. They are going to demand guarantees to make sure that the sanctions against Iran are going to be fully lifted. And they're going to remind Trump that that policy that he had during his first term failed, because the policy was that the U.S. would get out of the nuclear agreement, then they would exercise maximum pressure on Iran, economic pressure, political pressure, and then they would overthrow the government.
Right.
And this was many years ago. The Iranian government continues to resist these pressures and continues to grow. So when you have a failed policy, you need to change it. And the hope is that the Trump administration realizes that they shouldn't be following the failed policies of the past.
All right, we'll have to leave there. Thank you very much indeed, Professor, for joining us with that perspective there.
Thank you.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.